My name is Mia Calloway, and I'm 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, I became the youngest licensed architect at Hargrove and Dean, one of the most respected design firms in Chicago. I thought that was the kind of news that might finally change something between me and my family. I was wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Growing up in the Calloway house meant learning early that love was not distributed equally. My sister, Danielle, was 2 years older, and from the time she could string a sentence together, she had a gift for performing, for knowing exactly what to say, exactly how to tilt her head, exactly when to smile, to make our parents melt completely. I never had that gift. I was quieter, more interested in sketching floor plans in my notebook margins than in charming a room. My mother used to say Danielle had the personality of someone who was going somewhere. She never said where she thought I was headed. Our father, Frank, worked in insurance and spoke mostly in practicalities. Our mother, Carol, was a woman who measured worth in appearances, what the neighbors saw, what the extended family heard at Thanksgiving, what could be announced proudly at church. Danielle always gave her something to announce: a debate trophy, a college acceptance letter, a boyfriend from a good family. I gave her quieter things she never quite knew how to present: a scholarship, a portfolio that won a regional competition, overtime hours I never asked to be reimbursed for. For years, I told myself the imbalance was something I had imagined, that I was being too sensitive, reading too much into offhand comments, that if I just achieved a little more, worked a little harder, the scales would eventually tip. I believed that the way you believe things that are painful to stop believing. The dinner was my idea. That part still makes me laugh, in a hollow sort of way. I had just been promoted to project lead on the Meridian Tower renovation, a 37-floor commercial redesign that had been covered in Architectural Digest's online preview and sent my name circulating in circles. I'd spent the better part of a decade trying to reach. My manager, Patricia, had shaken my hand and told me in front of the entire team that I was the reason the Meridian client had signed a 3-year contract. I had driven home that evening with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from stress, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Pure, unhurried pride. I called my parents that same night. I told them about the promotion, about the Meridian project, about what it meant for my career. My mother said, "That's wonderful, honey. Have you heard from Danielle lately? She just got into the honors track at Northwestern Law." My father said, "Good for you, sweetheart," and I could hear the television in the background. I should have taken the hint. Instead, I booked a table at Sable, the kind of restaurant where the lighting is warm and golden and everything feels like it was designed for a moment worth remembering. I invited my parents. I invited Patricia and 2 of my closest colleagues. I invited Jordan, who had been my best friend since the first week of undergrad and who I trusted more than anyone alive. I did not invite Danielle, not out of spite, but because the event was small and intentional, and I wanted exactly one evening where the conversation didn't drift toward her like water finding its natural slope. Danielle found out and called me, her voice carrying that particular quiet, wounded tone she had perfected over the years. I explained it was a small professional dinner. She said she understood. She did not understand. The evening began beautifully. Sable's private dining area was everything I had hoped: brick walls softened by candlelight, a table set with white linen and crystal that caught the flame in little points of light. Patricia arrived first and embraced me genuinely. My colleagues followed. Jordan showed up in a blazer with a ridiculous gift bag containing a framed print of my first solo design concept from college and a very good bottle of Bordeaux. I laughed for the first time all week. My parents arrived 20 minutes late. My father walked in with the composed expression he usually reserved for things that required his tolerance rather than his enthusiasm. My mother was dressed impeccably, the way she always was in public, and she greeted my colleagues with the warm smile she kept specifically for audiences. She kissed my cheek. There were no flowers. There was no card. My father patted my shoulder once, the way you might acknowledge a passing acquaintance. We settled in. Patricia raised a glass and spoke about me with the kind of specificity that comes from genuine attention. She mentioned a structural problem I had solved on a previous project, a client meeting where I had turned a near disaster into a contract extension, the hours I had poured into Meridian before anyone asked me to. I kept my eyes on the table through most of it because I had never learned how to receive that kind of recognition without deflecting it somewhere safer. When the applause quieted, I looked toward my parents. My mother was smiling. For one hopeful second, I thought the smile was for me. Then she said, "It's lovely, Mia. Though I have to say, we've always believed that law is where the real change happens. Danielle just made honors track at Northwestern. She's going to change lives in the courtroom someday." The table stilled. Patricia recovered first, the way gracious people do. "You must both be so proud. Mia is genuinely one of a kind." Her tone was generous but firm, a small defense offered quietly. My father set down his fork. "Oh, we're proud of both girls. It's just that Danielle has always had the kind of mind that argues for people who can't argue for themselves. Architecture is a fine career." He said the word fine the way people say it about weather that isn't quite what they hoped for. I picked up my water glass. I set it back down. I heard Jordan shift in the seat across from me. Over the next 30 minutes, I watched my parents redirect every conversation thread that circled back to me. Patricia mentioned the Architectural Digest preview, and my father nodded politely before asking if anyone had followed the Northwestern Law moot court results. A colleague complimented the renovation sketches I had shared earlier, and my mother smiled and said, "Danielle has always been the one who could really talk to people, you know. That's where the real talent is." As if I were sitting somewhere else. As if I were not the reason anyone was seated at this particular table on this particular night. Jordan caught my eye across the table, a small, steady look that said, "I see this. I see exactly what's happening." The moment it broke was not dramatic. It was quiet. My mother, responding to something Patricia said about my future at the firm, tilted her head and said softly, "Honestly, we sometimes wonder if Mia would have found more of herself if she'd followed a different path, something with more impact. We've always worried she settled." The word settled sat in the air like something dropped. Patricia looked at her. Jordan looked at me. My colleagues found sudden interest in their dinner plates. I set down my fork. I didn't raise my voice. I had spent 29 years learning how to manage my voice around these two people, how to keep it even and small and inoffensive. "I'm sitting right here," I said. My mother blinked. "We know, sweetheart." "Do you know what I had to do to sit here?" I asked. "Do you know how long I've been working at this? How many projects I took on at cost? How many weekends I gave up? How many times I put Danielle's tuition ahead of my own savings because you asked me to? Do you actually know any of it?" My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place." "You made it the place," I said. "You made it the place the moment you sat down at my celebration and spent the evening talking about my sister." My mother's voice dropped low. "We love both of our daughters equally." Something in my chest went very still. I looked at her. "If this is what equal looks like," I said, "then I think we have very different definitions of the word." My father pushed back slightly in his chair and said, in the smooth, low voice he used when he wanted to end conversations, "You've always had this problem, Mia. This need to make everything about you. We raised you and your sister and we gave everything we had. And somehow that's never been enough for you." I heard the words. I felt them arrange themselves into the pattern I had been collecting my entire life, one tile at a time, until the mosaic was finally, unmistakably clear. I folded my napkin. I placed it on the table beside my plate. I looked at my father, then my mother. "You're right that I have a problem," I said. "I spent 30 years believing that if I worked hard enough, you'd eventually see me. That was the problem." I stood. I looked at Patricia and my colleagues and Jordan. "I'm sorry about this. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know." I picked up my bag, and I walked out of Sable into the cold Chicago air, where the city moved around me the way it always does, indifferent and enormous and somehow still clarifying. I didn't cry that night. I drove home to my apartment in Logan Square and sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and my heels still on, and I just breathed. Not because I was fine, but because there was nothing left inside me that wanted to perform sadness for an empty room. What I felt was older and quieter than sadness. It was the feeling of finally being done pretending a thing was something other than what it was. My phone lit up after midnight. A message from my mother. "You embarrassed this family. I hope that dinner was worth it." Then, one from my father. We didn't raise you to behave this way in front of your colleagues." Then 3 missed calls from Danielle. I put the phone face down on the counter and went to bed. In the morning, I went to my laptop and pulled up my bank account. For 3 years, I had been sending a fixed transfer every month to my parents, a contribution to household expenses that had started as a temporary measure after my father's minor health incident and had simply never stopped. On top of that, I had been covering Danielle's law school application fees, her bar prep course, and a chunk of her rent because she had asked me to when she started, and it had seemed like something family did for each other. I sat looking at the screen for a long time. Then I canceled every transfer. My hands were steadier than I expected. There was no drama in the moment, no thunder, no final confrontation. Just 3 clicks and a new silence that felt like the first honest breath I had taken in years. Jordan called that afternoon. He had texted right after I left the restaurant and I hadn't answered, but now I picked up. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Tired," I said. "Mostly just tired." "I know." There was a pause. "Can I say something?" "Yes. You've been carrying something that was never yours to carry. That's not love. That's just weight." I didn't answer. I looked out my window at the line of old brownstones along my street, at the maple trees just beginning to go bare, at the ordinary, steady life that had been waiting outside my window the whole time. "I know," I finally said. The weeks that followed were strange, in the way that new things are strange, because they were quiet, and I had forgotten that quiet could be something you chose rather than something that happened to you in absence. At work, something had shifted. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I began to notice that I stopped bracing for my own ideas. In meetings, I spoke without prefacing my opinions with softening language. I presented the Meridian designs without apologizing for the boldness of the structural changes. Patricia noticed. She asked me once, after a client call, if something had changed. "I think I just stopped waiting for permission," I said. She looked at me and nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "Don't start again." I began to build my apartment into something that felt like me. I had lived there for 2 years, but kept it sparse, half unpacked, the way you keep a space when part of you hasn't fully arrived yet. I bought a secondhand velvet sofa in a deep teal color. I hung my college sketches and my first professional blueprint on the wall above my desk. I found a ceramic lamp at a flea market on Milwaukee Avenue and spent a Sunday arranging the plants I had been quietly collecting for months into the west-facing window where the afternoon light came in long and gold. It was small and intentional, and entirely mine. Jordan came over one evening with takeout from the Thai place on Armitage that we had been ordering from since graduate school. We sat on the kitchen floor, which had become something of a habit when neither of us wanted to be formal about anything, and we ate pad see ew out of the containers, and he told me about the argument he'd had with his own father years ago. When he chose graphic design over the business program his father had already mentally enrolled him in. "He didn't speak to me for 8 months, Jordan said. "What changed?" "He saw my work in a gallery show. Didn't say anything. Just sent me a voicemail afterward that said, 'I saw your name on the wall.'" Jordan paused. He still hasn't said he was proud of me, but I stopped needing him to. I looked at him. "How long did that take?" He thought about it honestly. "Longer than I wanted. But one day you just realize you've stopped checking for the notification. You've moved on and they're still back there and you can't fix that. You can only walk." He picked up his fork. "You can only walk, Mia." 3 weeks after the dinner at Sable, my parents showed up at my door. I had just come home from a site visit at Meridian, still in my work clothes, still carrying my laptop bag and the residue of a 12-hour day. I opened the door because I heard knocking and assumed it was the package I was expecting from my supplier. Instead, there were my parents standing in the hallway of my building like they had every right to be there, like they had tracked me down through channels I hadn't given them and now stood on my threshold expecting entry. I found out later through a mutual cousin that my mother had asked for my address under the pretense of sending a birthday card. I filed that information away for exactly what it was. My father was in his good coat. My mother had her purse held in front of her like a shield. "We need to talk," she said. I looked at them for a moment. Then I opened the door wider because some part of me had been raised to be hospitable even when hospitality was not warranted, and that reflex is hard to override immediately. They came in. They sat on my teal sofa. My mother glanced around the apartment with that particular look she had, not quite approving, not quite critical, just assessing. My father looked at his hands. I stayed standing. Danielle is in trouble, my mother began. The bar prep program she enrolled in, the good one, the one in the city, she can't cover the second installment. We've helped as much as we can, but we've had expenses. How much? I asked. My mother blinked, as if the directness surprised her. $4,000. I nodded slowly. And you came here because you've always been the one who... Because I've always said yes, I said. That's the sentence you're looking for. My mother straightened. We're family, Mia. We are, I said. And 3 weeks ago, at a dinner I organized and paid for, you sat across from me and told me in front of my colleagues and my mentor that I had settled. That I had a problem with needing to make things about me. That my sister has always been the one with the real talent. I paused. And now you're here asking for $4,000. My father cleared his throat. We were upset that night. You put us in a difficult position. I put you in a difficult position, I repeated. I heard my own voice, as if from a small distance level, unhurried. I paid Danielle's application fees, her bar prep deposit, 3 years of monthly contributions to your household. I did all of that while building a career that, according to both of you at the table, was fine. I looked at each of them. Now, when did I get to be anything other than a bank account that came with the inconvenience of occasionally wanting to be seen? My mother's mouth pressed into a thin line. You're being cruel. I'm being accurate, I said. There's a difference, even if it's uncomfortable. My father stood. He was not a tall man, but he was practiced at occupying space. We gave you everything we had, he said. You gave me the framework, I said. I built everything else alone. And I would have been glad to keep building, to keep contributing, to keep being the daughter who handled what no one else wanted to handle, if just once, one single time, you had looked at me the way you look at Danielle. My voice didn't waver, but something behind it did. I'm not angry at you for loving her. I'm not asking you to love me more. I'm just done pretending that what you give me is the same thing. Silence. My father sat back down. My mother looked at the wall where my college sketches were hanging. She looked for a long moment, long enough that I wondered what she saw there, whether she recognized anything, whether she had any idea that those drawings were from the same year she forgot my birthday because she'd been traveling with Danielle to visit law school campuses. We're proud of you, she said finally. The words arrived stiff and too late, the way a translation sounds when it isn't quite right. I know you think that's true, I said. I don't think you know what it would have meant for me to hear it when it actually mattered. I moved toward the door. I'm not going to send the $4,000. I'm not going to send anything for a while. Not because I want to punish Danielle, but because I need to stop making myself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. That's a boundary I should have set a long time ago. My mother stood. For a moment she looked at me, really looked, and something passed across her face that I couldn't name: grief, maybe, or recognition, or some complicated thing that fell between the two. You'll regret this, she said. It was almost automatic, the way a defense mechanism becomes a reflex. Maybe, I said, but I've spent my whole life regretting the silence. At least this way, the life is mine. My father paused at the door. He didn't say anything. He looked at the lamp I had found at the flea market, at the plants lined up in the window catching the last light of the afternoon. Then he walked out. My mother followed. The door closed with the smallest sound, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I stood in my apartment alone and took one slow breath, then another. There was no triumph in it. There was no collapse either. Just the steady, unfamiliar feeling of having told the truth without shrinking from it, and the quiet that settled in afterward like dust after a long movement. I called Jordan. He answered on the second ring. They came, I said. I know. Are you okay? I looked around my apartment. At the teal sofa and the blueprints on the wall and the plants in the window and the lamp casting a warm circle of light across the floor. Yes, I said. Actually, yes. The months that followed were the first ones in my adult life that felt entirely like my own. I kept my hours at the firm, but for the first time, those hours felt like investment rather than escape. The Meridian project moved into its construction phase, and I made the kind of decisions that required confidence I hadn't known. I had access to structural calls, material choices, conversations with contractors twice my age who tested my authority the way people do until you stop letting them. I stopped letting them. Patricia recommended me for a design panel at the Chicago Architecture Biennial. I almost declined. Jordan told me not to be an idiot. I accepted. I spoke on that panel about designing for invisibility spaces that work hard but don't announce themselves, that serve the people inside them without demanding attention. Afterward, a woman I didn't know came up to me and said she had taken notes on what I'd said and was going to share it with her entire graduate seminar. A journalist from a design publication asked if I'd be willing to do a short interview. The piece ran 6 weeks later under the title, "Mia Calloway is Designing Spaces That Let People Breathe." It was one of those profiles that asks about your process and your influences, and then somehow, because the journalist was perceptive and the conversation went long, it finds its way into the deeper things. I spoke about growing up unnoticed, about learning to build things that lasted from the inside out long before I was doing it professionally, about the particular loneliness of being capable in a room where no one is looking at you and the strange freedom of eventually stopping to care. I didn't name my parents. I didn't name anyone. The piece circulated in ways I hadn't anticipated. My inbox filled over the following days with messages from architects, from students, from women I had never met who said my words had given them language for something they had been carrying wordlessly for years. One woman wrote that she had forwarded the article to her mother with no note attached. Another wrote simply, "I read this at my desk and cried and didn't know why until I realized I've been waiting for the same thing." I sat with each message for a long time. Not because I had solved anything, but because there was something in being witnessed by strangers that was different from being witnessed by family lighter, somehow less burdened by history, more simply about the truth of the thing itself. My parents did not reach out about the article. Danielle sent a single text that said, "Saw the piece. Interesting." I put the phone down and didn't answer. Jordan took me out to celebrate. Not to Sable, somewhere smaller, a neighborhood place on Damon where we had been going for years, with mismatched chairs and good wine and a bartender who knew Jordan's order. We sat at the bar and I told him about the messages I'd been receiving, and he listened the way he always listened, with his full attention and no visible agenda. "You know what's different about you?" he said at some point, studying his glass. "Tell me." "You used to talk about your work like you were apologizing for taking up the space," he said, "like you were always explaining why it deserved to exist. Now you just talk about it." He looked at me. "You just talk about it like it's true." I didn't say anything for a moment. "You told me once," I said, "that you can't fix the fact that they're back there and you've already walked. Do you remember that?" He nodded. "I think I'm finally walking," I said. He raised his glass. "About time." There's a thing that happens when you stop spending energy on what you cannot change. It doesn't rush in all at once. It accumulates slowly, the way light does in the early morning, an incremental brightness that you only notice in retrospect. I started noticing it in the things I had been postponing the morning runs. I kept meaning to start. The ceramics class I had bookmarked and never signed up for. The long-distance friendships I had let go thin from neglect. I started returning to them one at a time, and each one felt like recovering a version of myself I had set down in a hallway years ago and kept walking past. My apartment, by now, had become fully mine. There was a dinner party there in November, 8 people around a table I had extended with a folding leaf and mismatched chairs from 3 different rooms. Jordan brought his new girlfriend and they sat across from me arguing amiably about something and laughing. And Patricia came and brought a bottle of wine she said she'd been saving for a reason that turned out to be this one. And 2 colleagues who had become genuine friends arrived together and stayed late, talking about a project none of us were supposed to be thinking about on a Friday night. The room smelled like garlic and candles and something warmer than either of those things. I stood in the kitchen for a moment before I brought out the food, listening to the overlap of voices from the next room, and I felt something settle in my chest the way a key settles into a lock. This is what I had been working toward without fully knowing that was what it was. Not the absence of my parents' approval. Not the victory of their eventual recognition or the satisfaction of some final reckoning. Just this ordinary, extraordinary room full of people who had chosen to be here, who brought their attention and their laughter and their care without condition or comparison, and who sat at my table and called it home. Jordan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Are you hiding?" "Just thinking," I said. "About?" I picked up the serving dish. About how long I spent knocking on a door that was never going to open, and how I've been standing in a room full of open doors the whole time. He was quiet for a second. Then, "That's going on your wall." I laughed and carried the food out, and the night continued, warm and unremarkable and entirely mine. I don't know what Danielle did about the bar prep installment. I don't know whether my parents found another solution or whether they sat with the discomfort of a problem they couldn't redirect toward me. I don't know, and I have made my peace with not knowing. Some stories I spent years waiting to hear the endings of, and I've come to understand that not all endings are mine to witness. That's not coldness. That's just the geography of a life you've drawn the boundaries of yourself. What I know is this. I am 29 years old. I designed a building that 37 floors of people will work inside of every day. I have a best friend who tells me the truth without softening it to spare me. I have an apartment that looks like who I actually am. I have a career that operates on my instincts and my effort and my name. And I have learned, slowly and with some difficulty, that the love that comes with conditions attached is not really love. It is a transaction dressed in the language of family. That, the truest thing you can give yourself, is the permission to want more than that. Not more than others have, just more than silence, just more than fine. Just the ordinary dignity of being seen for what you are, without having to earn it over and over in a currency that keeps changing. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of everything I was trying to prove, but I think that's all right. I think that's actually the beginning. I think that's where I finally get to start.